Shabbat Shalom and welcome to Teshuvah Bible Studies. My name is Van and we're doing another Parashah HaShavua, which is the Torah portion for the week in Hebrew. And as usual, I am dividing this portion into three parts where I answer some general questions in the first part, and then in the second and third part, I go deeper into the portion and the information that is being relayed through the portion for the week. So in this first part, I've been answering questions sequentially based on just logical progression. And last week, well, not last week, but a couple of weeks ago, we talked about emunah, which is faith in action, and how faith without works is dead. And that raised a few questions from the audience, from people who heard the Bible study, because they were talking about how these two topics seem to contradict each other. And that's something that the Lord brought to my heart, Elohim brought to my heart to discuss a little bit further. And that's why this week we're going to answer the question, what is a paradox? What is a paradox? And we're going to first look at the definition of the word, and then we're going to explore the topic a little more and understand why we can have two statements that seem to contradict each other. Like, for example, we are saved by grace through faith, and faith without works is dead. Those things seem to contradict each other. They seem to be opposites, but they're both true. And that's what a paradox is. So just for you who are joining us the first time, first of all, welcome to the channel, welcome to the family, and I hope you're able to glean a lot from this Bible study and also continue to join us in this journey. This channel is about doing Teshuvah. That's why the name of the channel is Teshuvah. And Teshuvah means returning to Elohim, returning to our Creator, returning to the basics of what the scriptures say. And to do that, we do the in-depth study in Hebrew, and we learn the original version of the scriptures, and that's how we are able to explore these truths and learn more and more how to get closer and closer to our Creator, to Elohim. So that's the purpose of this channel. And these questions, I've been creating them myself and answering them in sequential order of logical progression. But if you are listening to the study and you have individual questions or questions that you want to have answered by this part of the study, go ahead and write them in the comments below. Write your thoughts, your comments, and your questions about each episode. If it has been answered in the past, I will just answer it with the link to the topic that has already been previously discussed. But if it's a new topic, I will take the time to answer these questions as they come in on this part of the Bible study. Okay. So first thing I did was look at the definition of paradox. And I didn't want to have like a definition that fits my worldview, right? I just went into Google and I Googled paradox, and it actually came up with the perfect definition. I mean, it is the main definition of this word. And it says, it's a seemingly absurd or self-contradictory statement or proposition that when investigated or explained may prove to be well-founded or true. So it's exactly what I said, right? It seems to be absurd or it seems to be contradictory, but if you investigate it, you will see that it is founded on reality. It's founded on truth. So when we talked about emunah, the last time that we did this Bible study, those statements seem to be contradictory. And then we explored it in context, and I was able to explain how both of those statements were true in their context, right? So because a lot of people still had some questions, I wanted to talk about this paradox, right? So for example, here are some examples in scriptures that are considered paradox, and they seem to be opposite, and they seem to be contradictory, and they seem to be something that is, a lot of times even atheists will use these arguments to say that the Bible is contradictory, or the Bible is in error, or it's contradicting itself. But they're not. They're actually both true in its context, and if you explore it further, you will see that it is well-founded or true, right? So one example is Yeshua. Jesus is 100% man and he is 100% God. Those are contradictory terms. They're opposite of each other. But if you look at them in their context and you examine the scriptures in its context, you will see that both of those statements are actually true. No one has seen God. We see that in scriptures, right? And there's a bunch of statements that say no one can see Elohim, no one has seen his face. And then there's also scriptures like this one that says those with a pure heart will see God. Again, contradictory, right? They're opposite of each other. And if you just look at that, you say, the scriptures are wrong. There's contradiction here. One of those two cannot be true, but in fact, they're both true in its context. And if you examine it, you'll see that they're both true. Another one is the Shema prayer, right? That says Elohim is Echad. He is one. And also there's a bunch of other scriptures and statements that show us that Elohim is a complex unity, a complex Elohim, and that is actually three parts of the Godhead, three different people. So again, contradictory. It doesn't seem, we even created a word to explain this, which we call Trinity, right? So you could look at different Bible verses and you could use those Bible verses depending on your worldview to explain both of these scenarios. But in my opinion, both of these are true in its correct context, and that's what another paradox. We are saved by faith and not by works, and faith without works is dead is something we explored last week. It's a paradox, right? Both of those are true, but they seem to be opposite. And there's a lot of other examples. I mean, there's so many that we could just stay an hour here giving examples, but I picked these out specifically because these are the ones that are mostly discussed between people of the same faith. In other words, we're the people that believe in scriptures, we believe that there is an Elohim, there's a creator, we want to follow him. But there's a lot of these things that divide us, that some people believe one thing and some people believe another thing, and it ends up giving discussions and quarrels between the body, which are part of the same covenant, the same people, Israel or the church, but it causes division because we don't understand that both of these can be true. And some people think that only one of these is true, and some people think that only the other one is true, and it causes division. So that's why I wanted to address this. So can two or more things be true at once? As I have already said several times, the answer is yes, but I wanted to use a logical example to illustrate this so that maybe we can open up our minds and see things differently, see things from other people's point of view, and understand that we cannot put Elohim in a box, right? We can't put the creator of all things into a small box of our understanding and then think that he has to stay inside that box, right? He can do whatever he wants. He's the creator. He can do all things. So one thing that seems impossible for us is very possible for Elohim. So I'm going to take a side step here and kind of give you an illustration that will show how this can be true in a logical way. I'm going to step away from religion, step away from philosophy, and I'm going to show you in a logical way where this statement can be true. And it was going to take a little bit of time, but I think it will pay off in the end. It will be worth it, right? To illustrate this. So here's the question, right? In mathematics, which of the following is true? And I put here several answers. A, 1 plus 1 equals 10. B, A plus 0 equals 10. C, 1 plus 1 equals 2. D, all of the above, or E, we don't have enough information to respond to this. So I'm going to give you guys a few seconds to answer this question, but I'm already 100% sure that almost everyone has picked the answer C, right? Most of us quickly answer C, which is true. Again, not only do we answer that, but we probably thought in our head, Idiot. That's the easiest question in the world. Even a child can answer this. But that's because we're talking about our concept of simple mathematics, right? We're talking about simple mathematics that everyone, the majority of the people learn from kindergarten, right? That we learn that 1 + 1 = 2. And that's something that, so we think that is an obvious answer. But the fact is that the answer, the correct answer here, believe it or not, is all of the above. All of these are correct in mathematics, right? Mathematics, all of these are, and that's what I'm going to show you, so that hopefully that will open up your mind to see that based on our experiences or based on context, different answers can be true, even though they seem contradictory, right? So the question is not specific, and in math, all three answers can be true based on the system being used. In other words, based on context, okay? So to explain this in a way that most people can understand, I'm going to show you how numbers are actually abstract. Numbers were created to represent something physical, something real and concrete, but they don't exist. Numbers don't exist. Even when you study mathematics, a math teacher will tell you that numbers do not exist. We created numbers. We created numbers for a purpose of counting or calculating things, right? So the decimal system is the most common system used, and it most likely is because we have 10 fingers. Most likely we created the decimal system because we have 10 fingers. And when we're counting things, we usually use our fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? So logically, it follows that most of us will use the decimal system for counting, right? However, for us to be able to count things, each number has to represent something physical, something real. And each number represents a value, a real thing. But if we're going to give a different symbol or a different symbol for each thing in an infinite way, it loses its value, right? So in other words, if we had 100 things and we're going to be like that one, the symbol for the having nothing is this one. The symbol for having one thing is this one. The symbol for having two things is this one. And we keep going, right? And then we go, okay, the symbol for having 10 things is going to be another scribbly drawing that I draw here. And then 11 will be another one, and 12 will be another. In other words, if you have a different symbol for each thing represented, it loses its value because it will never have a consistent system that everybody can use, right? So that's why we stopped at 9, right? We stopped at 9. How do we represent the next digit? How do we represent something that has 10 physical things, right? The way we do that in math, in a mathematical system, is that we created placements, different placements, right? Different houses is what we call it when we're being taught as children, right? So now, if we want to count to the next value to represent 10 things, what we do is the first position represents groups of 1, and we set that back to 0. And the second position now, these are groups of 10, right? And we put the number 1 here. So the reason 10 represents 10 things is because in this position, these are 10s. Each one of these are 10s. So in other words, if I had a 3 here, it's not really 3, it's 3 times 10. Everybody understands this. Again, I'm being simplistic on purpose to try to show you the logic, right? Of how we do things and how we count. So this is 10 because in this position, every number here represents 10 things. And in this position, every number represents one thing. So 11, for example, will be 1, 1 because it will be 10 plus 1, right? 12 will be 1, 2 because it's 10 plus 2. If we put it over, when we get to this position, it's groups of hundreds. So if we have 1, 1, 1 is 111. We have 1, 2, 1 is 121 because this is 100 plus 20 plus 1. Okay, so again, very simple math, right? This is my child understands this. Most children understand this, right? So that's how a system works, and children can understand it. Now, what happened was in the mid 1900s, we started inventing machines called computers. Even the name has meaning. Computers are machines that do computation, which is a word that means calculations, right? So computers they do computations, and we created these machines so that they could do math faster than any human being can do. However, a machine called computer cannot understand the number 2. It only understands something on and off. It only has 2 representations of reality for a machine called computer. So if something is off, the computer understands that as a 0, and if something is on, the computer understands that as 1. So this is called a binary system. Binary system only has 2 digits. So for a computer to represent the next value, it has to do what we already just learned in the decimal system. It has to move it to the next group. But for a computer, these are groups of 2, not tens, right? So now I think hopefully this is making sense, right? So now if a computer wants to say 2, he has to represent it by a 1 in the house of 2s and a 0, which is a 10, the same symbol for 10 for us. So going back to that question, right? 1 plus 1 in the binary system is equal to 10. It still represents the value of 2, but the symbol used is 10. So that answer is also correct. 1 plus 1 equals 10 for binary system. Hopefully this is making sense, right? So that's how we got that 1 plus 1 to equal 10 to be a correct statement, because in binary, because I put that on purpose, right? I put the question in mathematics, which one of these are true? If I had put the question in binary, which one of these are true, then the only answer that would be correct would be A, if you remember correctly, because A had the answer 1 plus 1 equals 10. But I put in mathematics on purpose. I was vague on purpose, right? All right, so without going over the whole thing again, I think it's fairly understood now. After a while, when they were doing more and more advanced computers, the numbers became ridiculously long, right? Because if we had to represent the number 100, for example, in decimal, in a binary form, it was several digits. So the digits kept growing more and more. So if I wanted to say a million in binary, it would be a very long number of 10100 like that. And it would be hard for us to even comprehend that number when looking at it. The computer would have no problem with it, but we wouldn't understand that. So that's when they created another system of counting, another mathematical system called hexadecimal. And in hexadecimal, you could count up to 16. And the reason is 16 because the computer, again, it was doing it in number, each house was jumping by 2s. So this was the house of 1s, this was the house of 2s. These were the houses of 4s, these was the houses of 8, and then 16. So that's why we did the hexadecimal system, which is another computer counting system. But this one has representation up to the number 15. So you have the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's equivalent to decimal. But the A represents 10, B is 11, C is 12, D is 13, E is 14, and F is 15. But then if you wanted to say 16, you have to jump to the next house. So that's where A plus 0 equals 10 is also a true statement. So if you go back to the original question, that's why the answer was all of the above, because they were all correct in its own counting system. So all that, I said all that for what? Just to show you that depending on the system you're using, different answers that seem to be contradictory can be true. And people who only learn binary will argue to the cows come home that only their answer is correctly. And people who only learn decimal will argue to the cows come home that they're the right one. And people who only learn hexadecimal are going to argue that they're the only right one, when in reality, all three of them are correct. Depends on the context, depends on the system that they're using. All right, so context is the most important aspect of examining a statement. For example, and I'm going to use another simple example here, and this one I'm going to be fairly quick, right? Because I want to get to the point of all this. There's a point. There is a point for all this. Okay. So, if I ask you a different question, all right, are tomatoes green or red? Are tomatoes green or red? Okay, so let's say that you live in this community, this isolated community, right? And you're not the farmer, you're the consumer. And all you do is purchase the food and eat it. So if you live in a community that always removes the tomatoes from its vine when they're not ripe yet, before they're ripe, right, and eat them right away, then in your reality, in your worldview, you're gonna say that the tomatoes are green. Tomatoes are green. For me, I always see them green and then I eat them. I never see them red, so they're green. Now, somebody else from another community in another part of the world, they always remove it when the tomatoes are ripe and they eat those tomatoes. In other words, they don't see it growing, they don't see it green. They just see the tomatoes when they go purchase it at the supermarket. They're gonna say tomatoes are red. They're gonna say tomatoes are red. I think you get the point. The reality though, in real life, in reality, a tomato can be a range of all different colors, from green all the way to red and in between, even yellow sometimes. So the answer depends on the context, right? If you're seeing a tomato when it's not ripe, the correct answer is green. If you see a tomato when it's ripe, the correct answer is red. They're both right. It depends on when you see the tomato, okay? That's my point. I'm trying to make this point. And so they're both correct. And I used this example on purpose because the better word here is not even opposites, it's complementary, right? So going back to emunah, going back to faith. Faith, you're saved by grace through faith, but faith without works is dead. They're not opposite to each other. They're not contradicting each other. They complement each other. If you have to look at the whole picture, you have to look at both of those statements together and understand both of those statements for it to be true and make sense. That's complementary. And I picked green and red because these are complementary colors, right? So if you study art, if you go to art class, you're gonna learn about complementary colors. They're opposite. That's why I use that, opposite. They're opposite in the color wheel and they complement each other. So like if you're doing a piece of artwork, they tell you to use complementary colors because it's pleasing to the eyes and it attracts the person who's beholding the art and it makes it more beautiful. So they teach you to use complementary colors. That's why Christmas, they use green and red, and then you see a lot of artwork that uses purple and yellow and blue and orange, like logos and team colors. And those are the ones that are pleasing to the eyes. Like the Dolphins, the Miami Dolphins, they use this aquamarine and the orange. Even though they're not directly complementary, it's close enough that it's pleasing to the eyes, right? And even if you use like Photoshop and if you use the invert color option that the Photoshop has, and you have something that's red, when you invert that color, in other words, this is the opposite of it, it will turn green. So it's something that's based on reality, it's based on truth, on objective reality. But it's an example that I wanted to use because to show that some of these things are complementary. They're not opposite. All right, so what's the point, right? What's the point? Why am I saying all this? Why am I addressing all this? It's exactly what I started my whole conversation when we started talking about paradox, is because we want to avoid division in the body of Elohim, in the body of Christ, in God's people. We don't want to waste time having these discussions. We don't want to waste time trying to prove who's right and who's wrong. I don't even like the word debate too much, because debate usually means that you're coming into the conversation trying to prove that you're right and the other person is wrong, when a lot of times what we should really be doing is having conversations, right? So before we even start doing debates or having these conversations, coming in with an arrogant spirit instead of a humble spirit that is trying to learn, we should answer a few other questions before we even jump into certain topics. And these, for me, these questions are, is this something that's going to get me closer to Elohim? In other words, is this something that even matters, that is going to change my life on a day-to-day basis, that is going to make my life better, that is going to make me closer to Elohim? If not, then maybe it's not even worth the discussion. Or maybe you could respect a person for having a different opinion and let them have that opinion based on their understanding, and you have your opinion based on your understanding. It doesn't need to be settled. It doesn't need to be argued or proven, or, proven. I say proven with air quotes, because that's what a lot of these people focus on, right? Proving things that they don't even know to be true or not. Is it something that's essential for salvation? This is the only time that I think it's worth having debates, right? Because if somebody's eternity is at stake, then it's worth debating. And if you have one understanding where you know that that's going to affect their eternity, and you see that that person is not having that understanding, then now it's worth debating. It's worth using scriptures. It's worth using his word to try to show that this is something that is essential. I'll use a few examples here, then I'm just going to throw it out. The scriptures actually say, right, in one of the letters that Paul wrote, he says that if we don't believe that Yeshua came in the flesh and that he died and that he rose again, our faith is vain. So in this case, if a person does not believe that Yeshua actually physically came, died, and was resurrected from the dead, that's something that's going to affect their salvation. That's something that's going to affect their belief, and is something that's like a core belief. Because if you don't believe that, what's the point, right? Yeshua came to save us from what? He came to save us from death. So if we don't believe we're gonna one day be raised from the dead, or that he was raised from the dead, what's the point? Why do you even have faith? What's the point? So that's something that's essential, in my opinion. Another thing that I think is essential, in my opinion, that may be discussed and that people have different opinion on, would be like the virgin birth of Yeshua, right? If Yeshua wasn't born of a virgin, as scriptures clearly state, that means he was born with original sin. And if he had any defect or any sin in his life, even if it was through original sin, his sacrifice will be in vain, because the only way that we can have an atonement sacrifice, a replacement sacrifice for our own sin, and the wages of sin is death. So the only substitution for our death is the death of a righteous person, is the death of an unblemished, right? He had to be an unblemished lamb of Elohim. So if he wasn't born from a virgin, his sacrifice meant nothing. He can't save us. So that's another thing that I believe is essential. And we could use scriptures to kind of show that point. And if a person doesn't believe that, they're in danger, right? That's an area that's in danger. And maybe not even then, because we don't have to understand how he saves us. We just have to believe that he saves us and live accordingly, right? So just some examples. So is this something that Elohim even desires for us to know? That's another question that I would ask, right? So there's certain things that it doesn't matter. You could have different opinions on, and it's not very clear in scriptures. And sometimes scriptures could actually go either way, but it's not essential for salvation. And I'll use this one, and it's a big one, right? It's a big one because a bunch of people are gonna probably either comment or not agree with me, but that's okay if you don't agree with me. But the fact that Elohim can be one and also three, that's something that you could believe either way, to be honest, because it's not part of what it's required for salvation. What is required for salvation is for us to believe that Yeshua came as the Messiah, and that he lived a perfect life, and that he died and he was raised from the dead, and he did that so that he could substitute our own death, so we don't have to die. He died so we don't have to die. There's nowhere in scripture that says that you have to believe that he's a Trinity or he's one. There's nothing that says that's something that has to be settled. And again, I think that both of them can be true. We can't limit Elohim. We can't limit the Creator based on our own understanding. We can't even answer that about ourselves, right? We have body, soul, and spirit. So this body that you're looking at right now through this camera, if you look at this, you could see and recognize that this is me. But my body is not the only thing that I have. I also have a soul and a flesh, right? A living soul. And once this body dies and passes away, I still will exist as an nefesh. But I also have a spirit that communicates with Elohim's spirit. So in a way, when Elohim created us in his image, he did create us as a trinity also. But we don't really know how to define that. We don't really know how to divide that. There are some people that only believe that we're bodies, right? And once we die, we cease to exist. They are naturalists and they're scientific, and they're not wrong because we are our body. And there's some people that are super spiritual and think that we don't have to take care of our body, and that doesn't really matter because all we are is spirit. And there's people that believe, so there's people that believe those three things, and they're all right. All three of them are right. But the truth is, we don't really know how to define that. We don't really know how to explain that. There's not sufficient words to explain that. So I believe it's the same thing with Elohim. There's not sufficient words or human understanding to explain that. So we don't really have to know the answer to that to be saved. We just have to trust in what he says, what he has revealed for us, right? So is it clearly stated and repeated, right? His words, when he wants us to know something, he says it and he repeats it over and over and over again. So if it's not clearly stated and repeated over and over in scriptures, then, we could have different opinions about it. And most likely, a lot of times we're both going to be right. And one day we're going to know him as we know ourselves. When we get there, we're going to have all our answers to all these questions. But until then, we could have different opinions and still be part of the same body, be part of the same people, be part of the same people who believe the same creator, right? I'll end this part of the study with the scriptures answering for itself, right? This is what I believe. Deuteronomy 29:29 says it all, right? The secret things belong to Adonai, our Elohim, but the things that he has revealed belong to us and our children forever, that we may follow all the words of this law. That scripture says it all. In other words, there's so many things that he has revealed that we're not even doing or following. And these are the things that we should be focusing on. These are the things that we need to study. These are the things that we need to emphasize. What has he said for us to do? That's what we need to understand. When it's clearly stated and he tells us we should do this or not do that, those are the things we need to focus on. That's hard enough. Everything else belongs to him. And if he desires to reveal it, he will reveal it. And if he desires to tell someone these secret things, because it does say, the scriptures do say that the mysteries belong to him, but it is also the glory of kings to seek these things out. So it's not wrong to seek truth. It's not wrong to try to find these things. But it's very arrogant of us to think that we know it all or that we have special knowledge. And if he didn't reveal that to everybody, maybe that's not something he needs everybody to know. So that's why I wanted to talk about this, guys. And I'm sorry if I went on a long rant, but I think it was worth it to kind of define and explain these things. And hopefully this will answer some of these people that have been bringing this up with me, these topics with me. And hopefully they'll watch this video and kind of at least see my point of view, where I'm coming from and what I want to focus on. What I want to focus on is learning his word, applying it to our lives, doing things that we could actually do on a daily basis, things that we need to keep trying to do to get closer to Elohim, and also to be the light, be the menorah, so the world can see an example, right? When we're fighting amongst each other, especially with things that really don't matter that much on a grand scale, it doesn't help the kingdom. It doesn't help, and I don't think it brings glory to our Father or helps other people want to join the body, join this journey towards Teshuvah, towards Elohim. So that's why I wanted to address this, and that's why I talked so long about it. So with that, I'll say Shabbat Shalom, and I'll see you guys on the next part 2. So don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you can be notified of the second part of this study. And I'll see you guys then. Shalom.